so lucky to be joined by Anna Hughes, the Director of FlightFree UK, who has so kindly agreed to host a workshop for us. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Anna. Please take it away.
Thank you very much, and thanks so much for inviting me. So for those who don't know me, my name's Anna Hughes, and as Lucy said, I'm the Director of Campaign Group FlightFree UK, and I'm also the sister-in-law of Councillor James Frecknell. Hi, James. So thanks for the invitation. FlightFree UK, we run a campaign called FlightFree 2020. It's a pledge campaign where we've asked people if they can pledge not to fly this year. Honestly, no one knew it would be so successful. Obviously, far fewer people are flying this year than anybody ever had any idea might happen. So I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about that. In terms of the effect of coronavirus on aviation. I gather from what James has said that part of the reason for these talks, or part of the inspiration for the talks, is looking at what's happening now and how that can inform our green priorities going forwards. So what effects has coronavirus had on aviation? Well, obviously, flights are now starting again, but for a long time it was 80% of fleets grounded. Obviously, that has a huge knock-on effect on the tourist industry. So that's something that we have to really consider. What are we going to do in the future? Because there are still lots of people in lots of countries who rely on aviation as a way of them having an income if they're part of the tourist industry. Lots of jobs as well. So this morning we heard that Airbus was cutting lots of jobs at their Filton plant in Bristol and one of their other plants. Now that's something that we can address. Or what will we do? Obviously, as the Green Party, as a socially responsible group of people, we're not happy that jobs are lost. But what can we do instead? So part of a green transition could be obviously redirecting those very highly skilled workers to constructing wind turbines, because aviation, aerospace engineering, it's quite similar to that kind of thing. So, there are loads of questions that this brings up. Obviously, one of the main impacts of coronavirus has simply been a reduction in emissions and an improvement in air quality, the return of wildlife to places that usually are very dominated by humans. And that's something that we can say, oh, that's a positive and that's a world we would like to see. So how are we going to get that? What are we going to do to ensure that that's what continues going forwards in a just way? Obviously, no one has chosen this lockdown that we've been given, and it's something that from FlightFree UK's point of view, we want people to choose not to fly rather than be forced not to. So it's an opportunity to say, okay, the effect of this many planes being grounded is a massive drop in emissions. Obviously, emissions are now rising again. Now everyone's back in their cars and the planes are taking off again. But we can point to that and say, look, we were telling the truth. Aviation is a huge source of emissions. Burning fossil fuels is something that we really desperately need to stop doing. And we can choose that going forwards. So that's where campaigns like ours come in. So yes, part of our job is to inform people of the climate impact of aviation and to inspire them to travel by other means. Now, of course, that's something that's very difficult at the moment because traveling by other means is really problematic right now. Last week, I think it was the first EasyJet flight in the lockdown, since the lockdown, took off from Gatwick to Glasgow. Well, there's a train that goes that way. That's part of our campaign, showing the alternatives and encouraging them. Of course, our government is advising that we don't take public transport at the moment, and no such advice seems to apply to aeroplanes. So this is something that we're trying to address as our campaign, and talking to lots of other campaigners about what we can do to encourage the government to not prioritise aviation quite as highly as they seem to be doing, and allow us to access those low carbon forms of transport once more. Arguably, if social distancing is difficult on a train, then it is also difficult on a plane. So those two things are equal there. Now, something else that was in the news today Because of course the airline industry will say, oh, we're addressing it, we're addressing climate change, we're addressing our emissions, we're serious about this, we're serious about sustainable aviation. One of the things that was revealed today is that Corsia, the Carbon Offset and Reduction Scheme for International Aviation, which is an international scheme, they had been talking about 2020 as using 2020 as the baseline for carbon neutral growth. And when lockdown started and emissions started dropping, a lot of climate campaigners thought, brilliant, emissions will be so much lower this year. So that means carbon neutral growth based on a 2020 baseline will actually mean it really will be serious. You know, we'll have a proper impact on emissions. Today, it was revealed that the airline industry has gone back to 2019 for their baseline measurements for a carbon neutral growth thereafter, which means that we're looking at 2019 level of emissions, which were pretty high, and so even carbon neutral growth from that means that we'll still have a huge number of emissions going into the atmosphere. So that's quite a tricky one. The aviation lobby is very powerful, and these are the kinds of tricks they can pull to sort of get away with not being particularly green, but claiming that they are. Now, obviously, the coronavirus is a massive crisis, something that understandably is taking over the whole, all news stories. It's ruling everything in our lives. But the climate crisis hasn't gone away. We mustn't forget that. So, but working away in the background, campaigns like ours still trying to keep that climate message on the table, in the forefront of people's minds. So, what we are asking is obviously our ask, which is for people to choose not to fly, is pretty tricky at the moment, but we're still trying to inspire people. So, like I said before, our two kind of aspects of the campaign are to inform people of the climate impact of aviation and to inspire them to travel by other means. And this is not just for the benefit of the planet, it's also for the benefit of the traveller. So just as an example, last summer I took a trip down to Nice. Now Nice is a place that most people would fly to. While I was swimming in the Mediterranean right next to Nice airport, planes were taking off every few minutes, and I looked at the beach and I thought, oh, probably most people on that beach have probably come here by plane. But there's no need to. There is a very perfectly good train and very enjoyable train that goes all the way to Nice from Paris. So I actually cycled all the way to Nice. Such was my choice for a summer holiday, but I got the train home with my bike, and it was a 9-hour journey all the way from Nice to London, one change in Paris. So it was a TGV high-speed train from Nice all the way to Marseille on the south coast, and then first stop Paris after Marseille. So it's a really quick train, and then a changeover in Paris, and then the Eurostar back here to London. So it was a calculating emissions wise, it was about 1/10 of the emissions. So train travel on the continent is really, really green. A huge reduction in emissions there. And of course, it takes longer to take the train than to fly, but it's far more enjoyable journey. You can look out the window. I could see a wonderful view of the French countryside. It's very relaxing. There's a chance to get up whenever you like and have a meal or have a beer or whatever you choose to do. And yeah, so the experience of that travel becomes part of your holiday or your trip. And this is something that we really try to demonstrate with our campaign. We have a lot of stories on our website from people who choose to travel by low carbon means across Europe, because of course traveling further than Europe is quite tricky and it takes a long time. It's possible, but it does take a long time. We have shared a couple of stories of cargo ships across oceans and things like that, but generally it's the kind of within a couple of weeks holiday that most people would have. How are you going to get to where you want to go, and how can you do that in a climate friendly manner? So yeah, train travel across Europe is a fantastic one. Also coaches, ferries, the emissions there are much, much lower than flying. So yeah, that's the idea of the campaign. And what I'm going to do right now is just stop for a second and see if anyone's got any questions that have kind of cropped up from just what I've said. And if not, I will continue. I've got loads more to talk about, of course. But also, oh, my phone's Okay, gone to the slide. If people want to put questions in the chat, I'll be more than happy to answer any questions. So, Lucy, do you want to see if anyone's got any questions?
Yes, there's a question from Gemma. She has asked, is there an easy way to calculate difference in emissions between travel options?
Really good question. So there are loads of websites that will do this. Eco Passenger is a good one. I think it only uses certain modes of transport: driving, flying, and train. I think it doesn't compare ferries or coach trips, but it's a good one as a baseline. And also, so I don't know if you have heard of Rail Europe, which is a rail booking website that does bus and rail travel across Europe. And whatever journey you are looking at, they will tell you the emissions saving. And that, so it will say, if you were to fly this route, it would be X kilograms of carbon, but taking the train is X kilograms. So that's really, really useful. Something that you can do as well, I think, on certain carbon calculators, like a carbon footprint calculator, it would give you different modes of transport. So you can look at flights, and you can say a flight from here to here, return or single, economy class or business class, and that will tell you the emissions. And then you can on a different tab, it will say how about if I drove that distance or a train or whatever. So there are various websites and things. And in fact, if it's helpful, I'll send some information to you, Lucy, so you can send it to everybody afterwards, with some links of those places that you can find that information.
Yes, please, definitely do send that my way. Another question is, roughly, how did the costs compare to Nice, flying versus the train?
Yeah, so it's difficult because I don't know what the flight would have been that day I travelled. I got back on the train for £100. I think it was 102 or something. If I'd done a return journey, it would have been 160. So that would have worked out £80 per leg. I saw an advert once for 50 quid to Nice, so I guess that's how much it would cost. It's what you have to consider then is that often the headline cost isn't what the final cost is, mainly for flying. So if you are traveling by train, pretty much what it tells you it's going to cost, that's what it's going to cost. For air travel, you would have to add the cost of getting to the airport, the cost of parking if you choose to drive to the airport and leave your car there. You'd have to factor in transfer on the other side as well. And I mean, I haven't flown Ryanair for many years, but they charge you extra for everything, right? So yeah, often airlines will sell their trips with a very attractive headline price. You know, Barcelona for £5. Oh, it's never going to be never going to be £5 ultimately. But yeah, there are loads of one of the issues here actually is that there is no tax on aviation fuel, which is one of the reasons why generally you can get cheaper flights than alternatives. I mean, alternatives aren't always that much more expensive, and of course you're not comparing like for like because you're paying for a different kind of experience. You know, as I said, the train journey is a holiday experience in itself. It's not just kind of a means of getting somewhere. It's not just a transit. By international agreement, when the airline industry was a fledgling industry, all the nations decided that there would be no tax on aviation fuel, and that's never been rescinded. So that's something that gives aviation an unfair advantage. If we were to flip that on its head and say we're going to prioritise climate-friendly travel, so low carbon travel, and we're going to reflect the environmental cost in the price of the ticket, then we would be looking at much cheaper train travel, more expensive flights, and that would then flip the whole thing on its head, because if you're looking at traveling to Barcelona or, you know, a European city and the cost is the same, then we hope that more people would choose the train.
Great, and one last one from me. Is there any way that airline industries can offset their carbon, for example, electric planes or not?
Okay, well, actually, carbon offsetting is a different topic, so I will talk about that in a moment. But electric planes is an example of something that could make the aviation industry sustainable. So we have, it's not just electric planes, we also have hydrogen fuel cells, sustainable aviation fuel. Those are, there are some futuristic ideas like airships. Well, it's not futuristic, but it's probably not that practical. But yeah, so these are the ideas that the airline industry is coming up with, and it'd be nice, it'd be great. Electric planes, one of the main problems is range. So you could definitely employ an electric plane on, let's say, the route between mainland England and the Isle of Man. Okay, it's a short hop. It's not very large plane, and like the Scottish Islands, all those kinds of routes, perfect, very appropriate for an electric plane. If you're looking at anything longer, the power to weight ratio is just impractical. So in order to store enough energy to make the plane go, you would need battery banks so big that they wouldn't physically be able to take off, or you wouldn't be able to fit anyone in the plane. So for like a small kind of 6-seater plane that's traveling less than 500 miles, yes, bring it on. Anything longer than that, it's not happening definitely now, probably not ever, maybe in the next 30 years, but we haven't got that long. So, you know, we have to decarbonize transport now. The other thing is, if electric technology were so viable, we would all be driving electric cars right now, and we're not. We're still massively relying on fossil fuels, even for our road transportation, and electric cars have been around for ages. And some commentators say we can have electric cars, and we can have electric planes, but we can't have both. And I would say, well, you know, we don't even have electric planes at all yet. So let's concentrate on decarbonising our road traffic and look at other things for aviation. In terms of sustainable fuels and things like that, some airlines do use a sustainable fuel mix. So that is maybe it's waste fuel or biofuel. It's very low at the moment because, as I've just said, there's no tax on kerosene, so there's really no incentive for airlines to buy expensive fuel just to be green. It doesn't make sense for them money wise, and also because the carbon savings by using that fuel are currently outstripped by the growth of the aviation industry. So we're looking at maybe 2% carbon savings from all these sustainable measures and 5% growth year on year. So it just completely knocks it out. Also, biofuels are a disaster for the environment. So we are looking at taking land, which is already at a premium in terms of agriculture, in terms of land that's needed for rewilding, all these carbon sinks that we desperately need to remove carbon from our atmosphere. And you want to use those to grow a fuel so people can go on holiday? just doesn't seem socially just. So yeah, and obviously one main source of biofuel is palm oil, which is a massive driver of deforestation. So it's a nice thing for the airlines to say tick the green box, but we can very quickly see through it as greenwashing or something that's not viable. And again, it all comes back to the time. Like, we're not using these now, and we've been given a decade to drastically slash our emissions. If we're relying on this technology, it's not going to be here in time. So yeah, this is a challenge and something that it's not quite viable. Are there any more questions in, or shall I talk about carbon offsetting now?
For now, that's all the questions. I'm sure there's more to come at the end. Okay, great.
So something that so as I mentioned near the beginning, we have this international scheme for carbon offsetting, CORSIA, Carbon Offset and Reduction Scheme for international aviation. Now, lots of people will say, consumers, airlines, you might even have seen a sign at your local petrol station by Shell that you can drive carbon neutral if only you'd pay a couple of extra quid for your offset. Now, I think we can all agree that offsetting is a bit of a myth, or, oh, sorry, offsetting's not a myth, it's a thing. Driving carbon neutral is a myth. Flying carbon neutral is a myth. Unfortunately, it sounds very attractive. So EasyJet have started, well, for a few years now, they have paid a small amount to offset all of their customers' flights. And this comes at no extra cost to the customer. So it's a very attractive part of their green package. And customers who know about this, because not everyone knows about it, customers who know about this are more satisfied with their flight. Maybe that means they think, oh, it's okay, this flight isn't problematic because there's no pollution because I've just offset it, which is a very problematic thought, because it doesn't change behaviour. Now, obviously, FlightFree UK is a behaviour change campaign, so we want people to choose not to fly. We want people to do that as well to reduce their own emissions, but mainly to reduce their own emissions, but also to create this social shift away from just jumping on a plane because that's what everybody does. It doesn't need to be what everybody does, and there are lots of other options, as we've covered a couple of them. So yeah, if offsetting means that you can just feel good about your emissions or feel that they don't count, then that is a dangerous thing. Talking a tiny bit about the various schemes, we've got tree planting. Everybody loves trees. Let's hear it for trees. But that is something that is very problematic. Often they can be monoculture trees as well, which is not very good for biodiversity, and it's not very good use of land. What actually is a good carbon sink is not lots of twigs in a field. It is mature forests which have a variety of undergrowth and all that kind of stuff. Those areas take years, decades to come to maturity. Whereas you have a myth that the plane emits carbon today right into the upper atmosphere where it creates the most damage. So for that to be somehow compensated for by planting a tree which may or may not come to maturity, may or may not absorb that amount of carbon at some point during its lifespan, is a bit of a false accounting, really. And of course we have to ask ourselves, well, how many carbon credits are currently burning in the Amazon, in Siberia? You know, it's the kind of in the Australian wildfires, which we've already forgotten about, even though that was only 6 months ago. You know, that's the kind of thing. Our lifestyles are so carbon heavy. We should already be offsetting all of it anyway. But it shouldn't be an offset. It should be a thing we do anyway to show that we understand how carbon heavy our lifestyles are. It shouldn't be something that we do because we want a reason or a way or an excuse to continue with our carbon heavy lifestyles. Yeah, we do have a few blogs on our website which explain a little bit more about the different types of offsetting and then the different kind of problems associated. So if you do want to have a look at our website, it's flightfree.co.uk, and there's a tab on there called Be Inspired, and that has information about people's travels and also information about the climate impact of aviation and carbon offsetting. I realise I haven't really talked about why we should be flying less, which I can do really quickly, unless there are any other questions right now.
Please do, take it away.
Okay, well, yeah, just really quickly. I mean, we talk about aviation as 2% of global emissions. So what's the problem? In reality, it's more like 5%, still quite a low number. That's mainly because only 5% of the global population has ever been on a plane. So we here in the West think, we might think that, you know, everybody flies because a lot of people here do. But yeah, globally, less than 10% of the global population has ever been on a plane, which accounts for why emissions globally are so small. But if you do fly here in the West, if you do fly, that will make up the highest part of your carbon footprint. So as a comparison, and this is on our website, so you can have a look at it. Typically, obviously, we can only deal with average figures, but typically if you're an average driver, if you have an average car, you do average mileage, in a year that will add up to about 2.5, 2.6 tons of carbon dioxide for a year's worth of driving. Now you can emit that by flying to LA and back in one journey. So that would create more emissions to get to LA and back than driving for an entire year. Same with the other things that we know are things that we need to reduce. So we need to reduce the amount of animal products we eat. We need to reduce the amount of energy we waste. We need to switch to renewable energy, all this kind of stuff. But even if you do go vegan, by the way, I'm not saying we shouldn't be vegan. I'm vegan. I love being vegan. I think it's definitely a huge thing that we can do for the environment. But by being vegan, I'm saving maybe about 1.5 tons of carbon a year compared to a meat-heavy diet. 1.5 tons of carbon, you can get to Egypt for that on a plane and back. So yeah, like one holiday to Sharm el Sheikh, well, that's it. That's completely wiped out all of those savings that you just made from being vegan all year. So it's easy to kind of, we tend to forget about flight emissions, maybe because we want a holiday so much. But yeah, it is really the big ticket item. It's kind of the one that sort of blows everything else out of the park. So stopping flying is a massive step towards the challenge we have, which is to reduce our climate change emissions. It's not the only thing that can do it, of course, you know, especially like as we've seen in the lockdown. Yes, our emissions have dropped quite drastically, but up to 20% they've dropped. There's still 80%. There's still lose 80% of all our emissions. Where do they come from? We're not doing anything. Okay, it comes from our embedded carbon in heating our homes, powering all our gadgets, all this kind of stuff. So yes, there are huge numbers of things that we need to do as well, but flying is the big one. We definitely can't solve the climate crisis if we keep on flying as we do. And it's kind of the easiest thing to do. Like, you know, you could give up your car, but if you work away from where you live, then that's quite difficult. If there's not a direct train to, you know, you could go vegan, but again, that's a very involving decision that requires a huge lifestyle overhaul for many people. Not going on holiday, or not flying on holiday rather, sorry, of course we can still travel, we just travel by other means. Not flying on holiday is an easy one. You just don't fly on holiday. Okay, any more questions? I see we've got about 5 minutes left.
Great. There's one from Tom. Is there still a place for limited offsetting in situations where people have no other option but to travel by air, or want to try and mitigate the impact on the environment?
Yeah, I think that's a very worthwhile thing to point out. Of course, some people can't, you know, I'm talking mainly about holidays. We can choose to go wherever we like on our holidays, but some people are required to fly for work or whatever. Maybe lockdown has shown us, though, that we don't need to do that quite so much with digital connections and things. But yes, many environmentalists will say, reduce your emissions as much as you can and then offset the rest. Because of course we can't get to zero emissions. None of us can. Like, we'll always have certain embedded emissions in our lifestyles. So some people do see a value in offsetting the rest. What FlightFree UK says is reduce your emissions as much as possible. And we kind of don't really talk about offsetting because it's like I said before, it's not a behavioural change. It's not something that will change behaviour, but also it kind of it sort of paints a picture that would kind of let off the hook a little bit. I would say if you do have to fly, then you can, there are certain projects that you could definitely give money to help, that would are beneficial to the environment, but I wouldn't call it an offset. I think the term offsetting is quite problematic because it sort of implies that what we've done doesn't actually count. It doesn't matter if only we, you know, we pay for our offset. So yeah, I'm lots of schemes out there that really do fantastic work for the environment. But I would say, yeah, it's better to kind of give a donation rather than call it offsetting.
Now that people who work abroad have been getting used to working online, do you think there'll be less people flying for work in the future?
Oh, it's gone a bit frozen. Are you still there, Lucy? Sorry, Lucy, can you say that one again?
Sarah has mentioned that people who work abroad are now getting used to doing it online. Do you predict that there'll be less people flying internationally for work from now on?
I think that business flights in general have been going down for the last couple of decades, actually. And currently, business flights make up less than 10% of the flights that we here take in the UK. And yes, I definitely see that will only go down more because we have kind of been forced into this whole Zoom lifestyle. I mean, sometimes, you know, that nothing actually replaces a face-to-face meeting, and in certain circumstances that will need to continue. But for people who, in fact, a climate charity did a survey of people who fly frequently for work, and the frequent flyers themselves said about half the meetings could definitely not have happened. They could definitely have gone without. So either virtual meetings, or a lot of it is kind of tied up in a culture, I think. So yeah, that can absolutely be positive going forwards.
I'd like to hear your opinions about the aviation bailouts from the Bank of England, if you have any.
So we were one of the groups that signed a letter from Greenpeace UK, which said that bailouts should not be issued if they didn't have green strings attached, basically, if they didn't have climate conditions included. Now, France is one of the countries which did have climate conditions included on its airline bailouts, which makes perfect sense. This is a public bailout. And it's so public money needs to be invested in a green future, you know, that makes perfect sense. And one of the things as well they did in France was they have restricted flight routes where a direct rail link exists, which is a brilliant idea and something that we really campaigned for as well. Especially, you know, some of our domestic flight routes here in the UK, it's just as quick, just as easy, and to go there by train. And if we were to invest in our railways instead of bailing out airlines, then we might see a much more effective modal shift away from flying.
Amazing. I'm just going to see, did anyone have any questions they'd like to say out loud instead of typing in the chat? No? Perfect. We've got one last one from Ben. What is it that we can do for you to help support FlightFree UK?
Oh, cool. Okay. I can't believe I didn't almost mention that. So our website is flightfree.co.uk, and on there you can make a pledge to take 2020 off flights, if that's something that you want to do. So we really value people's support in that way. We are going to be launching our new pledge in a few months' time for next year. So we're going to be doing different levels of pledges. So I pledge never to fly again. I pledge to take a year off flying, and that's a really good way to feed into long-term behaviour change. I pledge not to fly on holiday this year, and also we run regular fundraisers. So obviously we need money to operate. So yeah, that's something you can keep your eye on. We've also got Twitter at FlightFree2020. We're FlightFree UK on Facebook, and Instagram at FlightFree2020. So loads of ways to keep up with the campaign and get in touch.
Do you know how many people who have already pledged?
There are 6,350 at last check.
That's amazing. And I hope that we can be a part of that too.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you so much for coming here and hosting. We all really appreciate that you took some time to speak to us. I've certainly learned a lot, and I'm sure everyone else has as well.
Okay, well, my pleasure.